Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, June 17th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Alexander Hertel-Fernandez, author of State Capture: How Conservative Activists, Big Business, and Wealthy Donors Reshaped the American States and the Nation. Also on the program today, Iran announces an increase in its uranium stockpile as the Iran deal begins to unravel. Meanwhile, Donald Trump does not like the looks of his internal polls and has thus beheaded his pollsters. Supreme Court rules in favor of the Democrats in a gerrymander case in Virginia, but it is mostly a question of standing. New York Times claims that U.S. attacks Russia's power grid in retaliation for Russia cyber attacks. Trump is angry. Elizabeth Warren and James Clyburn to introduce a student debt bill. Buttigieg raises $7 million in April and praises Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Saudi Arabia may execute a teen for his past protests. And Bibi Netanyahu christens a new town. If you lived here, you'd be nowhere. Trump orders agencies to cut at least 1/3 of its advisory boards. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. It is Monday. Glad you could be here with us. Still basking in the glow of a wonderful Father's Day. Kids made me breakfast in bed after waking me 3 hours earlier. And then proceeded to not let me sleep last night too. So, but it was very sweet. And Mila made her first hard-boiled eggs.
Oh.
She was convinced she could not do it, but she did it. She literally boiled water.
It's magic.
Yeah, total magic. I hope your Father's Day or weekend was good. We were all here, except for Michael, of course, because today is Monday, and it is the second or fourth Monday of the month. Michael's Monday. Michael is Monday. There you go.
He did post a very cute picture of him with his dad.
Oh, did he?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. There you go. Still in recovery mode, I guess. So they released the big Donald Trump, George Stephanopoulos interview, of which we got a couple of clips this week, right? There was the clip about him saying that there was no collusion, and then there was what was the other clip that we played? I can't remember now because it was almost 3 days ago. Oh, right. I don't need to go to the FBI if somebody comes in. Let's say Norway gives me some information about somebody, and then of course every official involved in elections said, actually, that's not, you need to. It's illegal.
I'm going to hear about it first, see what it's in there.
So I don't know. I think after the Mueller report, the idea must have been by the Trump administration, now we can finally subject ourselves to a non-overtly and overly friendly media person for the first time in probably months and months. And Stephanopoulos seemed to press him on some things. And apparently they're also going to... This is just a bizarre moment that ABC let the cameras run. It's unclear. Apparently there are some in the media who are suggesting that this was on purpose, that Mick Mulvaney, who you will hear coughing in the background as chief of staff, was upset with the direction that these questions were going and coughed as a way of basically resetting things. I don't think it's going to quite work in the way that they thought it would, because I think they presumed like, oh, they'll just cut. I think Trump thought like whenever someone coughed in the middle of the Apprentice, we would just cut and do a whole nother take. But news people, of course, are just going to let the camera roll. And if they're going to find that moment, and in some ways, that's the most newsworthy thing, I think, and could be the most problematic for his supporters. Like, wow, this guy just like take two. I mean, I think most politicians can do that. It's just there's very little opportunity and value to seeing it, I think, from the perspective of news people, although it might be helpful to watch this of all politicians. But here's Stephanopoulos at Donald Trump's desk. They've got to do something about his tanning regime. But here is Donald Trump with Stephanopoulos.
When you will see my financial statement at some point, I assume it's going to be released, you'll be very impressed with the job I've done. Much, much bigger, much better than anybody. They're after my financial statement. The Senate, they'd like to get my financial statement. At some point, I hope they get it.
You're going to turn it over?
No, at some point, I might. But at some point, I hope they get it because it's a fantastic financial statement. It's a fantastic financial statement. And let's do that over. He's coughing in the middle of my answer.
Yeah, okay.
I don't like that, you know?
Your chief of staff.
If you're going to cough, please leave the room.
Get a shot of, and I'll come over here.
You just can't.
Just to change the shot.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, do you want to do that a little differently then?
Yeah, we just changed the angle. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
So at some point, I look forward to, frankly, I'd like to have people see my financial statement because it's phenomenal. No, it's not up to me. It's up to lawyers. It's up to everything else. But they're asking for things that they should never.
I don't even understand what he's talking about. Financial statement. Is he talking about his taxes?
It sounds like
Why are they looking for his taxes in the Senate? Wouldn't the House be getting his taxes?
He doesn't know that.
Well, it doesn't appear that Stephanopoulos knows what he's talking about. The whole thing seems wrong, and maybe that's why he was coughing, because he's like, wait, what? You're offering your financial statement?
Well, there was the early part where Stephanopoulos did ask for clarification once, and Trump's just like, you know, my financial statements.
And Stephanopoulos just went with it because he's like, who knows what we'll get out of this. I also like how he realized, like, oh, I have to reset because the camera hadn't reset. Take three. Clapper. Oh, we're just going to go? Okay. Let's continue.
Because it's phenomenal. No, it's not up to me. It's up to lawyers. It's up to everything else. But they're asking for things that they should never be asking for, that they've never asked another president for. They want to go through every deal that I've ever done. What they're doing is a disgrace.
What other presidents have turned over
they're trying to do step. They want to keep it going as long as possible to try and demean and hurt as much as possible so they can possibly win the presidential election.
I mean, there's some truth to that part. Certainly, the party out of power will be doing things to win their presidential election. I think there's probably also a lot of pressure to do more of that, certainly by grassroots Democrats. Democratic leadership seems to have a problem with that. But
yeah, it looks like he could only be referring to his tax returns, and that would be the House. But
yeah.
And I hope Mick Mulvaney is okay.
Both, there's two scenarios, right? The way to watch that. One is that either it was a setup and it was a little ham-fisted. Like, Mick, if there's a problem, cough. Yeah. And I'll pretend like I'm mad at you. And then we'll reset. But he didn't really reset. He just kept going. And otherwise, it just makes Trump look like more of the Mad King in this instance. But
or there is a God and Mick Mulvaney is dying of consumption.
That also would be nice. It would be nice if there was a lot of TB floating around that office.
Precisely.
But I don't know if we'll be that lucky. But who knows? That's a very strange moment there.
I don't like coughing.
Hey, folks, finding a new job is a lot of work. What if you had your own personal recruiter to help you find a better job? Well, now ZipRecruiter's technology can do that for you. Just download the ZipRecruiter job search app. Let it know what kind of jobs you're interested in, and its technology starts doing the work. The ZipRecruiter app finds you jobs you'll like and puts your profile in front of employers who may be looking for someone like you. This is interesting because we've advertised ZipRecruiter multiple times in the past, but from the perspective of an employer. I've used it as an employer. We also have someone in the office who used it as an employee or a would-be employee. Brendan over there, don't be shy. He knows how this works. If an employer likes her profile, like I did Brendan's, ZipRecruiter lets you know. So if you're interested in the job, you can apply. And that's what happened to you, right, Brendan? I don't think they had the app at the time, though. That would have made it easier. No wonder ZipRecruiter is the number one rated job search app. And based on a third-party survey, 7 out of 10 people who found a new job on ZipRecruiter increased their salaries. Well, did that happen, Brendan? Okay. Good. It did. There you go. Boom. All right. Don't get carried away. You don't have to get. Yeah. Over the course, as opposed to today, as opposed to when you started working here. There were results of a 2017 U.S. survey of over 500 ZipRecruiter users who got hired for a job they found on ZipRecruiter. But this is the best job you've ever had, right? That he said that very quickly, folks. The best job. Download the free ZipRecruiter job search app today and let the power of technology work for you. Don't wait. The sooner you download the free ZipRecruiter job search app, the sooner it can help you find a better job. I know this is true of just about everybody in the office. Are you trying to drink more water? Liquid IV hydrates you 2 to 3 times faster and more efficiently than water alone with the added bonus of vitamin C, B3, B5, B6, and B12. It's the fastest growing wellness brand. You can find Liquid IV everywhere, even at Costco. Use Liquid IV to fuel tough workouts, help prevent muscle fatigue, promote healthy post-workout recovery. It's a great alternative to traditional sugary sports drinks because there's no artificial flavors or preservatives. In fact, it's non-GMO, vegan, and free of gluten, dairy, and soy. Better yet, it comes in convenient TSA-friendly powder packets that are perfect for travel and preventing jet lag and altitude sickness. That's where I use it the most. And also the sickness that comes maybe when I travel, I drink a little too much. But I got my daughter using these when I feel like she's dehydrated and starting to get a headache. She's one of those type of kids who gets a headache a lot because she's doesn't drink enough water over the course of the day. And so I want to get as much water into her as possible.
I mean, same.
Do the same, right?
Yeah, I need someone to make me do that.
We've blown through this. Well, you can call your dad.
I guess I could.
But I get my daughter to do that. I give these things out as gifts. Well, I haven't done Halloween, but I love Liquid IV. I know you will too. Right now, my listeners get 25% off at liquidiv.com when you use my code majority at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order on Liquid IV's website. Just go to liquidiv.com, enter my promo code majority. That's liquidiv.com. Promo code majority. Don't wait. Start properly hydrating today. And lastly, it may feel like cybercrime is something that happens to other people, but stealing data from unsuspecting people on public Wi-Fi, it's one of the simplest ways that hackers make money. When you leave your internet connection unencrypted, you might as well be writing your passwords and credit card numbers on a huge billboard for the whole world to see. Protect yourself today with ExpressVPN. It secures and anonymizes your internet browsing by encrypting your data and hiding your public IP address. ExpressVPN has easy to use apps that run seamlessly in the background of your computer, phone, and tablet. Turning on ExpressVPN protection only takes one click. It costs less than $7 a month. Look, there's so many public Wi-Fis now. They're starting to have it around Brooklyn quite a bit now. If you're using these things for anything of import whatsoever, you got to use a VPN service. ExpressVPN is rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar. It comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Super easy. You get the app, you click it, you're all set. Protect your online activity today. Find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/majority. That's ExpressVPN, EXPRESS, VPN.com/majority for 3 months free with a 1-year package. The expressvpn.com/majority to learn more. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Alexandra Hertel-Fernandez about state capture, how conservative activists, big business, and wealthy donors reshaped the American states and, sadly, the nation. We'll be right back. On the Majority Report on the phone, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Assistant Professor of International Public Affairs at Columbia University and the author, most recently, of State Capture, How Conservative Activists, Big Business, and Wealthy Donors Reshaped the American States and the Nation. Alexander Hertel-Fernandez, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So, much of what you've talked about here, I've been aware of on some level, but the depth of research that you've done is fascinating, and it's nice to sort of have this stuff looked at almost clinically, if you will. And let's just start with the right wing troika, as you call it. What is the right wing troika, and how long have they been, I guess, operative?
Yeah, so I suspect many of your listeners, like you, have heard of some of the members of the Troika before, and there's been some great newspaper coverage of them. But what I try and do in the book is really pull together their entire history and understand how they've worked together, the sort of strategies that they've deployed, and where they've been most successful and why. And so the organizations that are part of the Troika that I study in the book include ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, Americans for Prosperity, or AFP, and the State Policy Network, or SPN. And they've been around for a while. ALEC got started in the 1970s. SPN got underway in the 1980s, and Americans for Prosperity is the most recent group. It got started in the mid-2000s, in 2004. And they're different organizations. They organize different constituencies. They're supported by different donors. But the reason why I call them the Troika, and I study them together, is that over time, they've been pushing a similar policy agenda, shifting state policy all across the country to the ideological right, especially, but not exclusively, on economic issues.
And they seem to, well, I mean, and part of the work you've done here is to sort of explain how that has happened, but they seem to fall into place and sort of complement each other, I guess, and have become to some degree enablers of each other, right? Like they all, it's almost like a conveyor belt, and they all have a different sort of station that they're at.
That's exactly right. The way I think about it is that each of them has carved out a specific niche of strategies that it pursues, and they work together, pushing in the same direction for very similar policy ideas, and in many cases, identical policy ideas. So ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, is in charge of the idea generation. It has companies, lots of Fortune 500 companies as members, along with conservative activists and philanthropies, including those affiliated with, for instance, the Koch political network. And they're developing model bill ideas, in some cases even the exact legislative text that it wants state lawmakers to pursue. And then it distributes those model bill ideas out to all of its members, and encourages members to adopt it by giving them everything you need to enact those bills. It's sort of like a bill in a box. They give you the idea, the research that you're going to need, the talking points, and they'll even connect state lawmakers with people who will testify on behalf of that legislation, or lawmakers in other states that have succeeded in passing that bill. So that's the ALEC component. The State Policy Network is a network of conservative think tanks across the states, and they produce the research reports and testimony, media commentary to back up all of the model bills that ALEC is producing. And in some cases, SPN affiliates in the states are participating in ALEC as members. So they're helping right from the get-go to provide the sort of intellectual and research base for conservative ALEC ideas. And then Americans for Prosperity operates outside of the legislature. It's sort of the grassroots army, the boots on the ground that provide the heft to get those bills through the legislature. So Americans for Prosperity has over 3 million grassroots activists spread out all across the country, state chapters in over 35 states with paid staff. You know, in many ways, it's like a political party. It's got these local, state, national offices and grassroots activists. And, you know, they'll mobilize their members to contact state lawmakers, to push them to enact particular bills. They'll threaten to run campaigns against lawmakers that don't support ALEC model bills. And they have campaign contributions that they can direct to ensure and threaten lawmakers that don't toe their line. So in that way, yeah, ALEC works inside of the legislature, SPN provides the support for those bills, and then AFP operates on the outside.
Someone like Scott Walker, it seems to me to be sort of the perfect encapsulation of a political regime / era location that brought all of those elements together in a very successful, from their perspective, way, and one that was really damaging and nearly became fully nationalized in that moment. And I should say, one of the things that really I think is well, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We can talk about Wisconsin, but so you have these three entities working together. What are the myths that you write about that surround the way that these entities work? Myths, I think, that are in many respects obviously generated on the left that maybe cover up the fact that the left has done such a bad job of not even like executing, like even contemplating competing in this territory.
That's exactly right. As I talk about in the book, I think on the left, amongst activists, politicians, and some pundits, there are some myths that have formed about why the Troika has been successful. For starters, I think it's easy to look at the success that the Troika has had in states like Wisconsin, but also Michigan, Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, and say, well, they're successful now. They must have always been successful. But as I try and show in the book, there were a number of points throughout these organizations' histories when they could have gone belly up. ALEC, for instance, almost went bankrupt once, and the State Policy Network really struggled to get off the ground in its early years. And I think if the left wants to seriously construct counterweights to these organizations, to build power in the states, the left has to understand not only what made these organizations successful, but the ways in which, they nearly failed. You have to understand both sides of the coins to understand why an organization is really successful. So what are some of these myths? I think by far the most prevalent one is that it's all about the money. You hear from progressive donors or progressive organizations that it's just not possible to construct something like ALEC or Americans for Prosperity on the left because there's not enough money to do so. And it's true, there are a number of very deep-pocketed conservative donors, most notably the Koch brothers and the network that they direct that raises, hundreds of millions of dollars each election cycle. But there's a lot of money on the left as well. And as I show in the book, there's been a tendency on the left to raise money and spend it in very inefficient ways. So when I look at efforts that the left has engaged in to construct counterweights to, say, ALEC, they've tended to focus on organizing in states that already have progressive strength rather than across the whole country, which is something that ALEC did very deliberately in its early years. I spoke to an executive director for ALEC that emphasized how, he was trying to build power even in moderate and purple states in the 1980s. And those sorts of organizational efforts in the 1980s really, they took years to pay off, but they paid off in a big way in states like Wisconsin where the groundwork was being laid for decades. And progressives need to do something similar there.
Well,
another way that I think.
Well, I want to get into, because this is a little bit of a bailiwick of mine, because the myth is that the amount of money is not is insurmountable for the left, but the quality of the money, like what the money does and what funders will fund, seems to me to be different. I mean, there was one chance. In the past 20 years, as far as I can tell, the most serious attempt at even recognizing that this was a problem was Howard Dean's 50-state strategy, which was almost immediately junked as soon as Obama won. And that wasn't even necessarily, that was more just, focused on electoral, which of course is certainly an important part of it. But that was just like one part of what would be your troika. I mean, what is it that you found that the quality of the money that was coming from the left made something like this so difficult?
Yeah, you're putting your finger on a big part of the story, which is that there is money there. It's just a question of whether or not it's going to be deployed in ways that are helpful for the left to build this sort of long-term power or not. And as I show in the book, there were some big obstacles there. For one thing, progressive donors, foundations, and individual donors have tended to focus with near laser-like focus on the federal government. And it was very hard to convince them to direct attention to the states. If you look throughout history at the times when progressives have started to try and build this cross-state power, it has tended to be during moments when they lacked control of the federal government. So you saw this during the Bush administration. You saw this again under the second half of the Obama administration when the Republicans controlled Congress. But what you see is as soon as Democrats have a chance of regaining national control, the money flows right back to Washington, D.C. to focus on Congress and the presidency. Now, don't get me wrong. That's really important, but you need to also be building that state capacity year in and year out. It's not something that you can just switch on and off like a light bulb. You need to invest over decades in building this kind of infrastructure, as I sort of alluded to with the construction of ALEC. It took them decades to really become successful.
Well, so why do you think that is? That the left, center left, however you want to describe it, is it that they don't realize what you're saying? Because it seems fairly obvious. It just seems, but my sense is that the money doesn't want, there's almost like a too much of a preciousness with the money coming from the left. Like, I would hate to expend money that is just a bet that's not going to work. I would rather go for something that is like sort of like I can see material benefit from. Like, I'm curious as to the extent that you have any, you spend any time talking about like the mentality of the money. Like, what is it? It can't just be that they don't realize how important it is. It's just like there's something that I think the money that comes from the left doesn't enjoy it in some way or something. Like they don't expend their money in the same way that the right does.
Yeah, so I do try and get at that a little bit in the book with some interviews I've done with progressive donors and going back through the archival record for some foundations and some donor groups on the left. And, I think there are two factors here. One is sort of a worldview that until recently really prioritized policy change at the federal government. I think, as I show in the book, there was a tendency to think that, real policy change, at least on the left, couldn't come about at the state level. When progressive donors, they write about in the book, thought about the states, they thought about Jim Crow and all of the ways in which state governments have used their power to oppress minorities. And they also thought about the ways in which states are pretty constrained fiscally. They can raise taxes, but often state legislators and governors are worried about losing businesses or wealthy individuals. And so, the thought was if you really want to do big redistributive things that move money to disadvantaged Americans and help minorities, it has to be at the federal level rather than at the states. And of course, there's an element of truth to that. But if you look throughout the broad sweep of American history, major progressive initiatives, even at the federal level, have started in cities and in states. You think about the New Deal, the Great Society, even earlier progressive era reforms. A lot of those were sort of tested and developed at the state level before going national. I think another issue on the left, and this is changing somewhat, but another issue has been that it's been harder to fund long-term organizational infrastructure building rather than sort of one-off specific projects with clear individual goals that you can track very closely over time. What is the outcome measure that a funder would use for building cross-state power? It's hard to know what that would look like. Certainly over the long run, you'd want to know, are you flipping legislatures? Are you passing progressive policy? But that's a really long-term goal. So what are the sort of deliverables or metrics that a funder would use in the interim to know if they're building power or not? That's a much trickier question, and I think one where funders are on the left are only just starting to think about ways to track the effectiveness of their giving.
That second one is really interesting because that's always been sort of my theory too, and it's a little bit that the left funders, maybe by virtue of being on the left, maybe there is a desire to have a sort of a more creative perspective on their money. And so the idea of doing one-off project and being able to say like, I in some way, created this, is more important to the left than it is to the right. And the idea of funding something that's operational that may not have a payoff for 10, 20 years and will be much more subtle in its payoff and much less attributable to, one individual is just not as satisfying. I mean, that to me seems like a genuine problem that is difficult to overcome. And let me ask you this. I mean, if that's the case, and if that's your sense as well, do you think there are mechanisms in which to reevaluate the implications of funding, operational things as opposed to sort of projects? If there's a way to sort of reevaluate, reassess, and repackage those successes that could appeal to the left, have you seen anything that touches upon, that's starting to come close in that regard?
Yeah, I think you're right that for any one individual donor, there's a tendency to want to see, your specific interests, your pet projects grow over time, and you're more reluctant to sort of fund just a small piece of a bigger infrastructure building operation. And I think that's where donor collectives or donor consortia, as I've called it in some other work, come into play. And so on the right, I think the Koch seminars, directed by Charles and David Koch, the billionaire libertarian industrialists, have been really effective at this. So when we talk about the Koch brothers, we tend to think about the brothers themselves. But really, I think the most impressive thing they've done is assemble a network of 500, 600 other really conservative, wealthy people that all agree to pool their money and give it to the priorities that the Koch brothers and their top lieutenants specify. And so when you join the Koch seminars, you have much less autonomy over how you direct your money than you would if you were just giving that money on your own. And that's allowed the Koch network to build up organizations like Americans for Prosperity that require concerted giving year in and year out from a broad base of donors. On the left, there's the Democracy Alliance, which was founded a little bit before the Koch seminars, but in many ways is trying to do a similar thing, which is to say it's trying to pool resources from wealthy billionaires and millionaires on the left in order to construct organizational ecosystem. And so it's funded a lot of important progressive organizations like the Center for American Progress and Media Matters, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. But over time, what you've seen is that individual donors have had a lot of ability to sort of direct their giving to the specific organizations that they want. And the upshot is now that the Democracy Alliance tends to pool money and spend a little bit of it on a whole bunch of different organizations rather than pooling that money and spending it on a small subset of organizations. Although I think they're trying to shift that focus, and I think a shift in that focus would be beneficial in order to build up the infrastructure that we're talking about, especially at the state level.
Are they having success? I mean, I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but I think is fascinating because I've been aware of the Democracy Alliance for over 15 years, and as far as I can tell, they have not in any way sort of had that the horizontal nature structure of that organization strikes me as one that has basically kept it from doing anything that's been super meaningful with long-term implications. It's almost as if they all gather together to pool their money and then decide, okay, now that we've pooled it, we're all just going to expend it as if we would as individuals.
Yeah, I think you're right to say and indicate that individual donors in the Democracy Alliance just have a lot more autonomy to give money where they want than folks who are joining the Koch seminars. And it's hard because I think on the left, there's a tendency to want to prioritize small d democracy. If you look at the Koch seminars, they're sort of a top-down command and control Leninist operation, whereas the Democracy Alliance, rather ironically, is more like a free market where everyone is sort of allowed autonomy to invest in the causes that they care about. But my sense is that the Democracy Alliance has recognized this as a weakness of the organization, and they're trying to pool money to invest in infrastructure. And they've created what they're calling funds now that where donors give money not to specific organizations, but to a fund that then tries to support infrastructure building in key areas. And the states are one of those areas that they're trying to build out those pooled funds in.
Okay, so what? Money, or at least the amount of money that is lacking on the left, is one of the myths. What are the other myths in terms of the left's ability or left's perspective on what the right has achieved?
So I think another big myth on the left is that it's easier for conservatives to work together because they're all on the same page. They all want smaller government. They all want lower taxes. They all want to retrench access to the franchise and these other anti-majoritarian reforms. And I think that is a big myth, because as I go through the history of these organizations, like ALEC in the book, I find that many of the different parts or many of the different members of these organizations wanted very different things that sometimes conflicted with one another. So take ALEC, for instance. You've got private sector businesses. They want lower taxes, but sometimes they want subsidies and they want measures like additional regulations that make it harder for their competitors to compete with them. You know, that in some ways is expanding the size of government. And you've got them in the same organization as libertarians like the Kochs that are against any and all regulation, any and all taxes and subsidies, even those that benefit businesses. And then, of course, you have social conservatives who care about things like abortion, care about things like welfare reform or gun rights. And for many businesses, those issues are toxic. They don't want to be associated with them. And so ALEC had to work very hard over time to come up with organizational mechanisms for getting all of these diverse actors to basically play nice with one another and agree to support common issues. And as I talk about in the book, a key innovation that ALEC and other conservative organizations at the state level engaged in was teaching all of these different and diverse actors on the right that they should prioritize power building above all. So I think one great example of this is the sort of attacks on the labor movement that we've seen from groups like ALEC. You know, ALEC managed to teach businesses, activists, in the social conservative world and the libertarian world, that if they all prioritized anti-labor reforms, that would weaken progressives and Democrats and make it easy for those other actors to pass their own individual pet interests, like gun rights or like anti-abortion efforts or like cuts to taxes. And so you've seen that playbook in the states that have flipped to Republican control, where the troika is very strong, like Wisconsin. What's the first measure that gets pushed through the legislature? Well, it's attacks to public sector unions, which then make it harder for progressives to defend against things like cutbacks to the minimum wage or cuts in taxes or environmental standards that are favored by these other constituent groups. And I think it's been much harder for the left to prioritize those kinds of power-building reforms. You haven't seen the same kind of effort to get all of the diverse interests on the left together and agreeing to commit to a common agenda.
I mean, this is, just a devastating. I mean, it's incredibly clear that this is a major problem for the left, right? I mean, we're supposed to have card check when Obama was elected. We see the right understand the relevance of the courts and all the gerrymandering that took place in 2010. I mean, and do you have any sense that on the left there is any more appreciation for this dynamic than there ever has been? Because, you know, I just think of like the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race that took place, I don't know, what was that, 4 months ago? That race was so key as to empowering all the work and that had been done to elect Evers and a lieutenant governor in Wisconsin, and to, you know, perhaps change the makeup a little bit of the assembly there, which is way out of whack because of partisan gerrymandering. And the left somehow just did not mobilize in that election, which to me is like, it's obviously not the only thing you want these organizations to do, but if you don't do that, you can't do the rest.
I think that's exactly right. For a really long time in the organizations on the left that I study, there's been a reluctance to think about political change and policy change as being a tool for building power. I think progressives really like to think about using policy to improve people's lives and think about improving social and economic outcomes. And that's important. But if you aren't building the political power, you're not ensuring that those policy reforms are going to be around in a year, 4 years, 8 years. And as you mentioned, I think there's been a huge oversight on the left in thinking about labor in this way. The labor movement's important because it raises standards for workers and ensures fair treatment, fair compensation. But it's also important because labor unions have been the backbone of the Democratic Party and of the progressive movement. And as I've shown in other research, when states pass these anti-union laws like right to work, Democrats are less likely to be elected from the presidency down to the state legislative level. The Democratic Party and the progressive movement is weaker. And so I think labor reform and other power building reforms really have to be the first thing that progressives push through when they gain power at the state level and at the national level. And I think as the years go on, Obama's decision not to push through card check and the Employee Free Choice Act is going to really seem like a big oversight that's hurt the Democratic Party. Now, I think that's changing. I've seen in the Democratic primary, for instance, a much greater willingness of the candidates to talk about the importance of the labor movement and reforms that could bolster the labor movement. And at the state level, you've seen some really important changes, both in blue states. You've seen California and New York pass measures to help public sector unions in the wake of the Janus Supreme Court case. That's the Supreme Court case from 2017 that applied right to work essentially to all of the public sector. But you've also seen it in some other states as well, like Nevada is going to expand collective bargaining rights for public sector workers for the first time. So those are all really important steps, but I think there just has to be much more of that, and not just in labor policy. Expanding access to the franchise too, I think, should be one of the first things that progressives do to sort of help build their political power over the long run.
And so, what's the next biggest myth that you think similarly, I guess, tasks the left to do?
When you're thinking about state legislatures, I think there's been a tendency to look at the success of ALEC and say they have model bills, therefore we should just have model bills and they'll fly off the shelves and that'll be that. We'll build an organization that is just as effective as ALEC. And you've seen groups over the years try and create their own model bills, post them on a website, and then sort of expect that to work on its own. And certainly ALEC is successful because it has model bills, but it's more than model bills. It's about creating long-term relationships with networks of state lawmakers and building up trust over time. ALEC is successful because it can offer, a deep set of resources to lawmakers, things like research help, being able to call someone if you have questions about a bill, being able to understand what the bill actually does, being able to get talking points and up-to-date research from leading academics that defends your bill, and of course, having annual meetings that bring together state lawmakers so that you can build those relationships and networks, because ultimately it's that sort of relationship building that builds the trust that lawmakers need in order to rely on these model bills. And so in the progressive organizations that I've studied, you've seen a reluctance to invest in those sort of longer-term efforts to build out these networks and relationships and research resources that I think would have been necessary in order for them to really counter ALEC. And that's more generally true, I think, of political organizations on the left, that there's sort of a tendency to carbon copy the specific strategy that is seen as being effective. In this case, it's model bills, but in other areas, it's different things. And I think that just doesn't work. You need to look at the broader way in which organizations are operating, and you can't just carbon copy individual tactics and expect that to work on its own.
So lastly, Alexander, who is this book for? I mean, who are you hoping? We're talking about entities like the Democracy Alliance. We're talking about an understanding of the Democratic Party leadership, both in the state and on a federal level. needs to start to contemplate that the first things they do should be to solidify and increase power when they gain a certain modicum of power, so that they have some durability and some long-term prospects to actually implementing, the sort of the policy sets that they're being sent to Washington to do. Like, who is this book for, and have any of those people been reached? And are they going in with a PowerPoint with your data and saying, look, this is why you're losing?
I hope so. I've been in touch with some progressive donors and some advocacy groups that are trying to bring lawmakers together across the states, and I've been heartened by the appetite around that. I think progressive donors and organizers and state lawmakers realize the power imbalance that we see across the states. And so there's a hunger for ideas that can help explain why progressives are in the hole and what they can do to get out of it. And so I think the book is meant to be a guide for anyone who cares about these issues, but especially folks who are serving in government, who are running organizations that try and move state policy or federal policy, and people who are supporting those organizations like foundations and donors.
Alexander Hertel-Fernandez, the book is State Capture: How Conservative Activists, Big Business, and Wealthy Donors Reshaped the American States and the Nation. We'll put a link to it on majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on. I had a great time.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, there it is. You need that data. It's all there. The stuff about the donors is something that, I think we've talked about on this program for a couple of years. Just at least in my anecdotal experience, that is part of the problem with the left, is they don't like to fund operational things. They like to center, left. They like to have things that they can say, this is the Sam Seder project for the blankety blank. Or
to register voters this year, basically.
I mean, it's something so that, like, I increased voter turnout by 10%, and I get a 6-month, ability to perceive my success or failure, and that I can actually look at something that has, finite edges and is defined in such a way that I can say, like, that was me. And I mean, I think to a certain extent, it is whatever the sort of the brain synapses and MOs that make someone of the left as opposed to the right. I think that's part of it. I think there's just an idea of, like, I want this. This is an extension of some form of personal expression.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also think even a lot of progressive Democrats do not understand the need for independent working class institutions like strong labor unions.
Yeah, I think that's been a problem, not even just with labor independent institutions. And one of the first things that Obama did, and I specifically asked Senator Sanders about this exact thing. One of the first things Obama did when he took office, or when he got elected, was to take OFA, Obama for America, which was a behemoth. I mean, talk about a networked army of grassroots activists and would-be activists. And they specifically, basically, just took that to the slaughterhouse, because they did not want a challenge on the outside that could go rogue, I guess. I don't know. They were specifically keeping people from funding outside organizations starting the day after the nomination in Denver after the Democratic convention. And there is a psychological problem. And it's also with the big money. I mean, in addition to the money not having as aligned interests as some of the groups that they might support, or maybe you get a little nervous about supporting a legislature that 5 or 10 votes away from getting a little bit more aggressive on rent control, or getting more aggressive on taxation or whatnot it is. And so, but I think that the problem that overrides that is just more like, yeah, no, I just want something where I can say, like, I'm responsible for this. I mean, I understand that impetus. I mean, I can't even have a boss.
Must be nice.
Must be nice. It's nice. All right, folks, going to take a quick break. Head to the fun half, where our members represent my boss, many, many bosses, so many bosses, and you can be one of them. You can yell at me for being late. You can scold me for bringing in, a tuna fish sandwich into the office and be like, what are you doing? Smell is infringing upon everyone. These are just some of the benefits of being the boss around here. Enforce a strict dress code. You'll notice Matt hasn't worn that red stained shirt in a long time, have you?
I don't know where it is.
It's underneath the couch. But you can become a boss of me by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you become a fraction of a boss of me. You have fractal bossitude over me by becoming a member for just pennies a day.
Ours is a bossful movement.
Indeed. So bossy. Plus, you get extra content and you get your show commercial free. If you're interested in the deals that we offer, you can always check out the podcast description. We will include that in the member show as well. Let me just also say, look, we've been having a little trouble lately, not a huge amount, but a little bit of trouble lately with some of the members' feeds and whatnot. Part of this is a function of a redesign of our back end and just learning new habits in terms of posting things. Part of it is there are new standards for advertising and for podcast specifications that have changed up things. So if we make the app compliant, other things have to change and this and that. Bear with us. We're doing the best we can. We're not one of these companies that are funded to the tune of $2 million or $3 million, or really nobody funds us. I mean, everybody is a customer. We do not have big-time investors or anything like that because I let Michael run the IPO offering and it didn't work out. And so here we are. But jointhemajorityreport.com. As always, if you want the fun half but don't have the financial resources to swing it, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. We will hook you up. We don't want to lock anybody out for financial reasons. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And Michael's not here, but he will be here tomorrow night for TMBS. Matt, do you have any idea what's going to go on there? Just a bunch of attitude, I bet.
Yeah, mainly attitude. I don't even know who the guests are, so I can't really plug it. So
it's going to be
just what? I mean, check it out though.
A lot of attitude, free Lula, and
yeah, there'll probably be a Lula segment.
I mean, things are heating up with that right now in a big way. That the story The Intercept broke. Big deal.
Michael's been doing a Michael Tracy like victory lap.
Oh yeah, going around
developments.
I saw him go and taunt Jimmy Dore, insisting that he apologized to his audience for. That's not true. Jamie, what's happening with the Antifada?
This week on the Antifada, we have on Ben Burgess, author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. We spoke with him about, oh, now it's loading. was reading it off Patreon. I guess I'll just have to remember what we talked about. How Marx could be the messiest bitch of the 19th century and still remain logically sound. Ben Shapiro, Stefan Molyneux, my run-in with an Elon Musk fanboy. So that is in the main episode and the bonus as well. We continue our conversation, and that all came out last week, and it's out now. Also, this past weekend, we recorded an episode with Sophie Weiner, who's been on the show once before. She's in studio for the first time ever. She's visiting from Australia, and we talked about her new technozine called Pluralitariat, which is a socialist technozine, and how we can use the kind of spaces opened up by party culture to try to radicalize both the culture and the world at large. We also, later in the week, have a bonus coming featuring Sophie Weiner as well. It is a Real Crime Think Hours, where we talk about an infamous Crime Think article about how the necessity of washing yourself and smelling good is just a capitalist conspiracy. So,
oh yeah, I knew that.
Check it out.
Matt.
Yeah, check out Literary Hangover. The most recent episode for patrons is the Such Were the Joys essay by George Orwell on his time at prep school. On Thursday, I'm recording it's going to be a really long episode. The first part is going to be sort of a sketch of the utopian socialist movements that made it to America, specifically the one of Charles Fourier, who is this French guy who thought we needed to make communities of exactly 1,620 people. That would be ideal, and they need to be like sort of giant Versailles type phalanxes, they'd call them, and also human activity is going to warm up the atmosphere.
I've read about this dude.
An interesting guy. And a lot of the things, he talked a lot about sex, so that kind of scandalized a lot of people, but he also predicted that the environment would heat up because of human activity. Which is an interesting prediction. He went a little bit farther.
All the sex.
And then he said the melting of the ice caps would make the oceans taste like lemonade. And that's something that everybody who likes to discredit him likes to bring up. No critic has ever not mentioned that part, but it would be cool if and maybe he's right. Who knows?
Well, they may taste more lemonade-y.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like lemonade.
Well, no, he said it tastes like lemonade.
Well, lemonade may have tasted differently
That's true,
back then, too. So you never know. They were very salty with their lemonade.
But he said expect a delicious treat. So
it took a while to get the formula right.
Yeah, and he also thought we would be able to ride like these sort of robot tigers or something around. But anyway, he inspired Americans. They set up one called Brook Farm that Nathaniel Hawthorne went to, and he thought it was kind of BS, so he left after about a few months, but then he wrote a satire about it.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half. We are back. The fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Fun half of the program. Let's see if I was able to time the call. We'll be taking your phone calls. We, of course, will also be taking your IMs. You can IM us on the app. As it is, as it were, all of that. Indeed. Here we go. Did I get in or did I go to the voicemail? Didn't even call. We'll try that again.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Please use no speakerphone and have your one comment or question ready. Listen for Sam to call out your area code. Sam will be with you shortly.
It's true. All of that is true, ladies and gentlemen. Just make sure that you. Where's my thing is not showing up in there.
Hello.
Hello. All right. Well, let's do a piece here. We talked about Donald Trump with Stephanopoulos before the interview. Apparently coughing. Mick Mulvaney was coughing and interrupting things. We don't know if that was planned or what the story was with that. Here is another moment as Stephanopoulos had a lot of access to Donald Trump. We've seen him now sitting in some type of garden. We've seen him in the Oval Office, and now he's riding in his limousine. It's weird. It feels like this was shot with an iPhone, doesn't it? Which is conceivable that they did decide, like, let's go with a smaller camera. The idea being that he will not feel like he is on TV. I mean, I know that is the theory that a lot of people have when they do some stuff like this. Maybe that's what was going on here. Here is Stephanopoulos talking to Donald Trump, where Donald Trump's pretending they're going to roll out a new health care plan. I feel like this is the fourth time he said this since the other health care plan went down in flames. I think the Democrats would love this. But here is Donald Trump insisting. I mean, there is a sense that he's like flailing around, panicking. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to in any way imply that he is capable enough to know whether he is genuinely in political peril or not. Could be he's just panicking and he has just as good a shot, if not a better one, of getting reelected than he did last time. So there's only so much value to this. And as long as it does not end up being like, maybe I need to start a war to, it may be largely irrelevant. But here he is talking about health care.
When you go to voters over this next year, what is the big unfinished piece of business you're going to say, this is what we're going to get done?
So we almost had healthcare done. Healthcare is a disaster, Obamacare. But we've managed it much better than they managed it. So we've made it serviceable, but it's not great. We're going to produce phenomenal healthcare. And we already have the concept of the plan. And it'll be much better healthcare.
Tell people what the plan is?
Yeah, well, we'll be announcing that in about 2 months. Maybe less.
It's unbelievable. He's changed, though, because it used to be 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's always the increments of 2, but 2 months will get you to it.
I wonder if there is some type of I don't know, sales research. They use 2. Give me 2 minutes. Give you on in 2 hours. Let's go to take this. Calling from what the heck is going on with this? Phone system is a little bit messed up. Calling from a 210 area code. There's the 2. 210. Can you hear me? 210. Are we up? 210. 210. Let's try this. Calling from a 617 area code. Who's this?
How's it going? This is Ben from Chicago.
Ben from Chicago. What's on your mind?
I was wondering if you could help me with some anti-union talking points that I deal with in my family.
Oh, you want me to give you anti-union talking points? All right. Well,
No,
these guys
help
are
me
all corrupt.
deal with that.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Well, all right. What are the talking points?
Well, my uncle has told me that the New York Teachers Union is a bad union because they just want more tenure and more unwarranted job security.
I mean, I've never, ever heard that they are looking for those things. I mean, it's, everybody I would imagine would want that. But first off, what your uncle doesn't understand about teachers is that there's no huge line of young teachers, great teachers who are like, I want to be in this profession where I get underpaid with working with understaffed and under-resourced schools. That's not the case. So the implication let's just carry out his argument. The idea is that they want to keep good teachers out and keep the old bad teachers in. There's no ocean or army of good teachers waiting to get in. A, and B, there's also real problems a lot of times with administrators. And as much as I'm sure your uncle, wherever he works, understands the personal politics, when you have organizations like this that are small little fiefdoms, because there's really no other way to do it, inevitably what happens is are you there?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. We're getting a little bit of feedback. Let me drop you, and I'll just answer your question.
Oh, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me now?
I could hear you, but you were, for some reason, there was getting some flapper. But to continue, I would say, tell your uncle that this is also one of the ways that you provide some accountability for, principals and the middle management at these schools. The bottom line is that what teachers want is probably a little bit more of a salary, but more than that, they want to be able to do really two things. One, they want more resources, which can be translated into less students, just more dollars per student. Because as you know, teachers end up, and I know this just as being a public school parent, in a well-funded school that gets extra funding because parents are able to contribute a lot of money. They still need things like, hey, at the beginning of the year, can we have tissues? Can we have magic markers? Can we have notebooks? Can we have this type of stuff? I'm not just talking for this specifically for the student, but I'm talking like as class supplies. And I think what they want, particularly coming out of this era of high stakes testing, is more freedom to do what every educator says is the way you should educate, which is it starts with the kid, with the student. Instead of trying to impose standardized measurements for the kid's progress, you start with the kid and you fit the curriculum around the kid to the extent that you can. Now, obviously, the more kids you have in the class, the harder that becomes to do. But I think teachers really makes teaching that much harder and less rewarding to not have the ability to respond to the kid. That's what educators do. And then I would say as a third thing, which really is sort of outside of the purview of teachers, but that's the point, is we need to deal with societal problems that end up getting manifested in school and in, the failures of education, like poverty, malnutrition, lack of early education, et cetera, et cetera. All right, let's go back to a 210 area code, see if we have this person, because it starts with a 2. 210.
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
Good afternoon, John from San Antonio. It's good to talk to you.
All right. Good interview with Alex Hertel-Fernandez. I referenced an article he wrote with poli-sci professors Mato Mildenberger and Leah Stokes in a call I made a few months ago. The three professors published an article in the New York Times on Halloween of last year called Congress Has No Clue What America Wants, with the subhead, People in the U.S. House and Senate Have Wildly Inaccurate Perceptions of Their Opinions and Preferences. So most of your listeners are familiar with the awesome progressive organization Justice Democrats. They endorse and promoted progressive candidates who won in 2018, like AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley. Justice Democrats are endorsing those candidates again in the 2020 cycle. In addition, they're endorsing incumbents Rahul Grahava, Ro Khanna, who's a leading surrogate for Bernie, and Pramila Jayapal, who's a Medicare for All bill, has over 100 sponsors in the House. Just as Democrats have been started looking for a candidate in January that they can endorse against Trump's favorite Democrats, Henry Cuellar, who represents the 28th District of Texas. According to the Congressional Quarterly Party Unity Study, he votes with Trump 67% of the time in the 115th Congress, which is the second highest total of any Democrat in the House. This district is a safe Democratic district whose margin of victory is usually around 30 points, yet Cuellar voted to defund sanctuary cities and reproductive services for women's health. He received an A rating from the NRA. He's a leading contributor to the GEO Group, which is a private prison company that has been sued on multiple occasions for allegedly forcing detainees to work for food. The GEO Group also makes a huge portion of their income imprisoning people on behalf of ICE. On Thursday, Justice Democrats endorsed Jessica Cisneros, a 26-year-old human rights attorney from Laredo, Texas. She supports Medicare for All, $15 an hour minimum wage, and the Green New Deal. She's already raised over $100,000 and was the lead story on last Thursday's The Young Turk Show, and even did an interview on MSNBC yesterday. According to Pew, millennials and Generation Z will represent 37% of the electorate in 2020. By 2028, they will represent a majority of voters. There are two articles that I recommend reading. One just came out on Thursday. It said brace for a voter turnout tsunami by Ron Brownstein in the Atlantic, and the other is the coming generational war, which is a subhead. The Democrats are rapidly becoming the party of the young, and the consequences will be profound. It was written by conservative Niall Ferguson, which I don't agree with often, and Heinz Friedman, who is a research analyst. And this was published on May 6th in The Atlantic. I'm extremely encouraged by the vast amount of progressive candidates that have already announced their candidacy. And as time goes on, this movement will continue to grow, and we will make a difference. So I want to hear what you have to say about Cisneros' run and anything else that I referenced.
Well, I couldn't be happier about Cisneros' run, and Cuellar has been horrible for, I think, as long as I can remember things. Period. Like, if I'm not mistaken, he endorsed George W. Bush in one of his runs for president, if not both. He's bad. And I don't know how he stayed in there, frankly. But yes, he is seems to me to be one of the perfect candidates to be, knocked off. The generational stuff, you read about this stuff. Hopefully it sticks. I hope that's the case. And I hope Democrats continue to sort of pursue that. But yeah, I'm totally excited about Cisneros.
Well, we saw it in the UK, right? Like the Labour Party of Jeremy Corbyn outperformed every single poll in the snap election that they had in 2017. And it was largely because people who don't usually vote in large numbers, such as young people and poor people, came out in droves.
Yeah, and the turnout in the 2018 midterms, as a percentage, the highest, the biggest increase was from the millennial generation, which went up from 20%, which is god awfully low, but it went up to 36, which is still lower than the other voting ranges for generations. But I mean, it's improving, and people are really enthused. And I think a lot of it is Trump, but also a lot of it is this new generation, which the younger voters relate to. I mean, they totally relate to AOC's policy agenda. It's totally in line. It's not radical in any way, to them. It's just that's the way what they believe, and I think it just really bodes well for the future of politics in America.
I think there's also probably, and this is completely anecdotal and speculative on my part, but I would also imagine that social media has made politics more accessible to more people and to younger people.
Definitely.
And so it filters down. There's just more mechanisms in which they can, run into politics algorithmically in a way that you couldn't before, right? Like you would have to opt in to, I'm going to watch Sunday morning talk shows. No one under the age of really, I don't know who watches that anymore, but no one under the age of like 40 would ever even contemplate doing that unless it was like almost like I'm the guy in our group of friends who's like sort of the geek, and that's the way I stand out, but I don't even really watch it. I just say I do because no one can call me on it. So I think there's a lot more access to politics, not necessarily with a lot of depth, but certainly some that enough to motivate people to at least go vote. But we shall see. I hope we do see that record turnout in 2020, and it'll be interesting to see if all of what's happening between now and then is largely irrelevant to the outcome. But one never knows. Appreciate the call, John from San Antonio,
right,
with a 210 area code. That worked out well. Maybe we got to do that again with another 2. That's it. There's only no 2s that have been online for a long time. Oh. This one's up there. It's a 5. Calling from a 517. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Tim calling from Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Tim from Grand Rapids, Michigan. What's on your mind?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about the massive efforts that have been going on from the right wing for decades, really, to just reframe history in order to pretend that all of their beliefs and policy prescriptions are correct because, they can't win the moral arguments or even the practical arguments. And so I was thinking about the tolerance paradox and how that doesn't stand up to scrutiny in such muddy waters. Like it could be easy from someone in the center to say, well, but you're not tolerating them. So I was thinking of a new framing, which is basically people on the right tend to demonize individuals because of who they are, color of their skin, what they believe, religion, how they behave, sexuality. People on the left tend to demonize individuals because of their ideas, because of their morals. I mean, does that seem like a good framing, or I don't know. I'm curious what you think.
I wouldn't say necessarily morals, but I think ideas and their actions. I mean, this is also what you're talking about, that sort of tolerance paradox. I never claimed to be tolerant. To me, like these, I just think the idea of principles in the context of human behavior is silliness. I I can understand sort of like broader things like this, but these sort of, that I am, principally tolerant, I think is silly. I think there are bad ideas. It's just that I won't, and I won't, and I, to the extent that I have any principles, it's just sort of like some broad, very broad, and I wouldn't even call it principles. They're sort of like, they're less specific than that about, I want the best outcomes for the most amount of people. And frankly, like, even that I think is also, a silly thing to say, because what I constitute, what to me means best is something specific. Someone was saying to me today on Twitter that, that it's, sort of like making some type of hypocrisy argument to me. And I don't care about hypocrisy. Of course, politics are hypocritical. Human beings are hypocritical.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in what the outcomes are. I can justify the outcomes. I'm sure there are times that I am hypocritical. Somebody was, saying like, oh, you must have no problem if you don't care about hypocrisy. You must have no problem with Mitch McConnell denying Merrick Garland a seat, but now saying that he will seat a Republican. Yeah, I have a problem with it because he's a Republican and because I know what kind of justice he's going to put in there. But I'm not going to sit around and whine because Mitch McConnell's hypocritical. Are you kidding me? If there was no hypocrisy in Mitch McConnell, he wouldn't exist. They would have to have. I'm not even it's just it's absurd to it's like, oh, my son, I say to my son, like, yeah, look, you can get a cotton candy later, but we stop off and get ice cream. And then he says, I want a cotton candy now. And I'm like, well, no, dude, you're not going to have 2 sweets this afternoon. He goes, you lied. Or like, we may have time to go see a movie. We ran out of time. You lied. Come on, grow up. I didn't lie.
Much for the tolerant left.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's just that kind of stuff. That's
well. I agree with everything you said, and I think what really matters is the policies that are in place and what actually happens. But I just was trying to think of a way to broadly cut through their incredibly disingenuous framing of everything.
Well, I mean,
in terms of,
I for me, the way I cut through that is just talk about the specifics. Like, I remember one of the debates I had with libertarians where he was like, well, the problem is that the American public doesn't appreciate that you need to deserve health care. And I'm like, well, then guess what? You're shit out of luck because, that's,
That's like talking about basketball and be like, the problem is the rim is actually only about 1.5 feet wide. It's like, well, it's a game you're playing.
Right, exactly. It's like, yes, it is a problem. It's a problem for you if you think that you have a sort of a bizarre belief in terms of like who deserves to be healthy. But it's not a problem for me. And there are definitely times where what the American public believes is contrary to what I want. And that's when it's a problem for me. But the principle... like the principle, even like the principle of democracy. Well, then you have to be okay with slavery if everybody's for it. No, I don't. And if you're against slavery when people are for it, then you can also be against other things. No, I don't. I can do whatever I want, and I'll sell it. I'll sell it to the American public. That's basically it. Appreciate the call.
Okay, thanks.
I just don't know how adults... make that distinction. Like, I just found out that partisan politics are like partisan. It's like a definitional, right? Like, that's the whole point. If we were just going to operate all of this on principles, we could just put it into an algorithm and walk away.
You just need to find the one principle that perfectly fits all these different situations.
Yeah, or even just do subsets. I mean, but it doesn't work that way.
You should make that your campaign slogan.
I will. No principles.
No first principles, certainly.
Right. Yes, exactly. No first principles. Because you know what? I'm not a religious fundamentalist. That's why.
Libertarians are going to love it.
they're going to have real problems.
That search for a sort of fundamental thing that can sort of explain all that's sort of fundamentalism.
It is fundamentalism.
Yeah.
It is just simply a different. I mean, someone a friend of mine who is rather Orthodox Jew told me one of the things that's nice about being an Orthodox Jew, being a fundamentalist, is that there's so many decisions that are taken off the table. Like Mardinity in particular is extremely relentless with decisions that you have to make. Every day, every moment, you have to make these decisions. It would be nice to wake up in the morning and go I don't have to choose what clothes I'm going to wear. I don't have to choose what I'm going to eat today. I don't have to choose or navigate how the relations I have with the different people in my family or my community or whatnot. So much of that is predefined for me that I don't have to deal with that. I mean, I think that's alluring. It's not, I just like that Dogma 95 with filmmaking. Good. I don't have to make a decision about which key lights I'm going to use because the rules are I don't get that. I don't have to worry about certain things. I'm going to shoot the movie, and but I'm sorry. I think that can be also super unhealthy. Not so much in filmmaking, but
yeah. Well, there are some choices that I think people should always be responsible for making themselves, and there are some that could maybe be taken off the table because we have too much crap in our consumerist world. Like, we don't need 10 different kinds of corn in a box for breakfast cereal, but our family relationships, the way we relate to our communities, and the tasks that we spend our time on, that's a choice that humans should have.
Agreed. Gregory from Oklahoma, the Green Corn Rebellion show is now on YouTube. Please subscribe to the Green Corn Rebellion show on YouTube, along with being a Patreon. I'll be covering news stories. I'll be doing album reviews and countdown lists.
Yeah, he's big on the new metal.
Thank you to all who have been supportive. When I was in high school, I was the political nerd who watched the Sunday morning political talk shows. I watched them with my mom while eating pancakes or waffles and bacon. There you go, Gregory. Well, I hear you, man. Believe me.
But
Snowflake.
Network.
This is a test to see if IMs are turned on, as they were not on Friday, and I was thus deplatformed, and MR listeners missed out on my topical and pithy remarks. Binder Dad. YouTube wished old Matt a happy Father's Day by demonetizing Doomed with Matt Binder podcast yesterday. Please visit doomed.tv, subscribe, and support. Thank you, Majority Report. Let's put that on.
I wonder if the alt-right was reporting him or something, or what happened there.
I don't know, but Matt will be on this show. Old Matt will be on this show a week from Friday as our Friday guest. Maybe we can get him in studio. That would be fun. Worlds collide. I don't know what that means. Michael's going to be doing this Friday because Mila is graduating from junior high. It's not the biggest graduation, but it's not the smallest either.
How many years was she at the junior high? 2 or 3?
3.
No, we only did 2 in North Dakota.
Really?
I was so relieved when I got out of middle school.
Believe me, I'm pretty excited for her to be out of there. Tanky Carlson. Hey, great show, guys. Been listening for a little since my awakening. One critique would be too much focus on white supremacy. That is not a big issue. It's just mainly mainstream madness. They're really just whites, working class folks going through a rough time. Plus, if we arrest white supremacists, then the left is next. No? Pesky proletariat Bernie supporters are real angry with Warren and are starting to sound a bit like 2016 Hillary supporters. Is that right? I didn't pick up on that yet.
I don't know what they're referring to. There's been some principled critique of Warren from Jacobin and other leftist outlets that people are trying to paint as sexism or whatever. But that kind of misses the fact that they still think Warren is better than a whole bunch of male candidates.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, Michael's annoyed with Elizabeth Warren, so maybe that's what this person's keying in on.
Oh, why is that?
He's just sick of her. Wants her to think she's stealing Bernie's shine.
Okay. Let's see. What should we go to here? We've got a couple of... oh, this is very exciting, ladies and gentlemen. Donald Trump still in the real estate marketing business. The latest... Let's see. What do we got here? Where the heck is this? So you will recall that Donald Trump has a special relationship with Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu is still in trouble, right? They have to do another election. They call that election, right? So he's having a lot of problems. And what is the last refuge of the scoundrel? Well, of course, that is patriotism. But what if you are already a uber nationalist? Well, then it's Trump. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unveiled a plaque marking the location of the newest settlement in the Golan Heights on Sunday.
You're too kind.
The marker proclaims the settlement will be known as Trump Heights. Yes, here it is. Netanyahu said the name was chosen to thank President Donald Trump for breaking decades of U.S. tradition and recognizing the Golan Heights as part of Israel in March. Prior to that point, the U.S. observed the international custom of considering it occupied territory. The custom. They're all international customs. Trump Heights, called Ramat Trump in Hebrew, is a symbol of the airtight alliance that's developed between the U.S. and Israel. Trump has repeatedly aligned himself with Netanyahu's right-wing policy vision for his country, arguably fascistic. The new town has yet to be built. Netanyahu called it a historic day. In a tweet, Trump thanked Netanyahu and the state of Israel for this great honor.
Who wants some land?
There you go. Can't wait to sell that. It's just the grossest. I can't even begin to tell you how sort of like viscerally disgusting I find that, all of it.
I mean, to be fair, I think of all the settlements as Trump Heights, so this is really just making it official.
I mean, in some respects, it is nice, at least, to call a spade, as it were, right?
Yep. And, you know, people who consider themselves progressive but are maybe not so progressive on Israel's issues, the connection between Trump and Israel's right-wing government is made very explicit.
Now, here's somebody who apparently does not have a problem with Donald Trump naming or moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. It has effectively... now, look, I think for a long time, certainly during the Bush years, although I think Obama may have, in some respects, restored or at least headed down a road to restoring the United States as an honest broker in the context of figuring out some way in which to end, at least to a certain extent, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But Mayor Pete apparently has no problem with what Trump is doing. And I'd be curious as to knowing what is going into this thought process. Here he is talking to Mike Allen on Axios' HBO show, saying he would not move the U.S. embassy back from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv.
Would you move the U.S. Embassy in Israel back to Tel Aviv?
I think what's done is done, and I don't think the Israelis believe that the U.S.
So you would leave it?
Look, we need a big picture strategy on the Middle East. I don't know that we gain much by moving it to Tel Aviv. I will say this.
I'll tell you what you would gain. You would say, we are committed to being an honest broker. We are committed to showing all sides in this conflict that we are not going to look at this from one particular perspective or another. We understand that Jerusalem is about as hotly contested as anything anywhere could be. And that's what it would show. And then you move on to the big picture. Continue.
We need a big picture strategy on the Middle East. I don't know that we gain much by moving it to Tel Aviv. I will say that...
So President Trump did the right thing?
No, I didn't say that. Look...
Well, you did. You wouldn't undo it.
That doesn't mean he did the right thing. Here's the problem with what he did, is that if you're going to make a concession like that, if you're going to give somebody something that they've wanted for a long time in the context of a push-pull, even with a strong ally like Israel, right? We have a push-pull relationship. And you don't do that without getting some kind of concession. Instead, we've seen the Israeli government continue to act in ways that are detrimental to peace, and I believe, therefore, also detrimental to U.S. interests. It's the same thing with the recognition of the Golan. Look, the Israeli claims in the Golan are not something to be ignored. They have a lot to do with legitimate security interests. But when we did that, we were doing something that could have been part of a negotiated package, and instead we just gave it away. Worse, we gave it away probably for the specific purpose of having an impact in Israeli domestic politics, which should be the last reason that we would be conducting U.S. foreign policy. It should be designed around American values, American interests, and American international relationships.
Do you support a right of return for the Palestinian refugees? That's, of course, the principle that Palestinian refugees or their descendants have a right to return to the land or property they were forced out of during the 1948 and 1967 wars. Do you support the right of return?
I think that concept can be honored in the context of a negotiated peace. I don't think it should be presumptively declared by a U.S. presidential candidate. I'm concerned, though, that we're walking away from the possibility of peace. When you have the Israeli government talking about annexing parts of the West Bank.
So you would not insist on that?
I think it could be honored as part of the framework of a negotiation. I'm not going to declare it at the outset as a precondition for peace.
See, I mean, here's the problem with the way that he's answering these questions, and he's doing so in a very smart way. I mean, he's extremely well spoken, superbly reasonable. I think he's right to say that this can be a part of a negotiated thing. I mean, I personally would say it should be. But you cannot in one breath say, we've given this away with getting nothing in return, and then unilaterally take off the table the idea that I'll take it back. Because there is a way to regain that leverage, and that is to say, hey, guess what? I can take it back. I can move it back. I can move it back just as easily as Trump unilaterally moved it to Jerusalem. I can unrecognize the Golan Heights just as easily as Trump unilaterally recognized the Golan Heights. Because international law is on my side. It's the only reasonable way to do it. I suppose there are concessions I could conceive of that the Israeli government could make that would do that. I don't know them off the top of my head because, of course, they're not concessions to me. They're concessions to the peace process. I mean, there is ways that an intelligent guy like Pete Buttigieg could articulate these things. But he sets up walls for himself that he manufactures that are artificial as a way of not really saying what he was going to do. The idea that anybody would come in and say, I'm going to take right of return off the table is absurd. Nobody would say that. I don't even think Donald Trump would say that. He would say basically the same thing in a dumber way, which is like, I'm not going to negotiate a deal right here with you. And so that's the thing with Buttigieg that is a little bit problematic. And I find this quality of his across the board very well spoken, very intelligent enough to know that he's not, at the end of the day, really saying anything or making any type of commitments. And that is very, very worrisome.
Well, he made a commitment to keep the embassy in Jerusalem.
That's true. That's very true.
What's done is done, right?
Very aware of the message he's sending.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He is tight roping. one of the things that we have said in the past is a problem with the UBI is that it is often is a political one. I mean, I think we've had multiple people on this program to talk about the UBI. I think at one point I had a little bit of a debate about it. In principle, I think it's a good idea to give people money. Or you could get around that by giving them goods like health care, and then you don't have to give them money. I mean, if you're going to give people $3,000 a year, guess what I would rather you give them? Health care. Much cheaper. Much more expensive than $3,000 a year. I think there's some value with baby bonds and whatnot. In particular, the thing I like about baby bonds is it doesn't provide the obvious cudgel to dismantle things like Social Security, things like medical insurance, things like automatic stabilizers like food stamps and food assistance and nutrition assistance, things like TANF, things like housing vouchers. And one of the ways that the UBI has been presented in the past, and it's very hard to imagine that it wouldn't be used, even if it was passed and implemented, it wouldn't be used in the future down the road as some type of leverage point, is to dismantle these things. And to actually just, in many ways, just, it's very much about basically saying, I'm going to let the market decide, but I'm going to give you a little bit of an advantage in the market. And here is presidential candidate Andrew Yang giving up the ghost here. Now, I don't even know if Rubin notices it, although he's been reading Milton Friedman, I guess, and it's certainly Milton Friedman's idea to do this. But here it is, Dave Rubin talking to Andrew Yang about UBI.
So why not just blow apart? So I think the best libertarian argument that I've heard for UBI is that basically if you want to do UBI, it's got the right idea. Why not just blow apart the social safety net as is, because we know it's just a boondoggle of middle management nonsense.
Pause it. Saying the words, it's a boondoggle of middle management nonsense means nothing. This is absolutely 100% not true. Food stamps, not a boondoggle.
You know what does mean something, though? Blow up the social safety net.
Right. That means something. But it's not. I would like to see evidence or data that suggests it's a boondoggle.
That's what's so frustrating about the Yang people is they think they're not being ideological when they say stuff like this.
Right.
Of middle management nonsense with all the whacked out incentives that you're talking about. Why not just take all of that money, which do we even know how much money is actually put into these things?
Of course.
So how much right now?
$600 billion, give or take.
Give or take. All right, so why not take the $600 billion that are on programs that we know are creating as many problems probably as they're fixing, if not more, and then do it that way? Like, do you think, because it almost feels like it's like a little bit of a stopgap, that you'd still have to get to that problem eventually?
Well, that's the beauty of this, the freedom dividend proposal, is that you have the $600 billion or so, and then you're saying, hey, guess what? Like, it's now a new right of citizenship, everyone gets it. And then what's going to happen is you're going to dramatically reduce the enrollment in these programs very, very quickly, because a lot of people will be like, I prefer the cash. And then this new incoming population would just opt for the dividend and then never end up on these welfare programs. So you'd end up shrinking the enrollments over time in the way you described. You just wouldn't do it all at once, because there are a lot of people in very distinct situations. And this is actually much more politically feasible and popular than going and trying to tear these programs up and from the roots up.
Yeah. Are you worried though that the
pause it? In other words, he's saying two things here. One is it gives you the political cover to go in and begin to dismantle the welfare state. And things like food stamps, food nutrition,
Disability
which is
assistance.
automatic stabilizer. It increases as more people fall into poverty if there is a recession. Without that mechanism, people are screwed, but you'll have been able to destroy it by that point because the UBI will keep them out of food stamps, and then we can just eventually make the program so small and restrictive. $600 billion. I mean, I love the idea that you can have this conversation. Convinced that it's a boondoggle, have no idea what it costs. Incidentally, our military budget this year is what? $760 billion? $770 billion, I think, going into 2020. But I love how you can just immediately say it's a boondoggle. Of course it's a boondoggle. How much is it? $600 billion? Is that a lot or is that a little?
Yeah, if you want to find some boondoggles, go to the Pentagon.
Yeah. Is there any more of this? Just a little more.
Are you worried, though, that because states have different things related to social programs, that, I mean, we sort of addressed this already, but just that different states will deal with it so differently in terms of how they're giving benefits off UBI, that it just is going to create this weird, we may have a gajillion people moving to one state and leaving another state or the rest of it, or you just think that that's...
Well, that's one reason why having uniform benefits, because right now there are block grants that go to various states and the states do different things with it, as you're suggesting. Mm-hmm. And those are the programs that would be swapped out for UBI. So the more people that opt into UBI, then the like smaller those grants would be.
Largely Medicaid. That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, the first thing he cites on the how are we going to pay for UBI is SSDI, and basically, and I've looked into this a little bit, but my understanding is there's about 8 to 9 million people on that get SSDI payments, and the average is over $1,000, over the $1,000 Yang dollar ones, and that's for like handicapped transportation and stuff like that.
This is Social Security disability insurance, which is very, very difficult to qualify for. And the idea that you would basically take the most vulnerable people in our society and use this as a mechanism to erode their support systems is just, this is, I mean, when we've talked about UBI in the past, that scenario is exactly what is problematic.
And so just to illustrate this for people, imagine you were getting like paying $1,200 in handicapped transportation costs a month. And all of your friends who aren't disabled, they get all their Yang bucks, $1,000 a month. But you don't get the Yang bucks because you need to keep your SSDI payment. Your friends are going to be like, hey, let's go to the beach with our Yang bucks this month. You're not going to be able to do any of that because you're going to be behind them every month because you have to make the choice between Yang bucks or these welfare programs. Like, if the Yang thing went to everybody regardless of any kind of assistance they got, then I think it would be an interesting program. But this torpedoes it.
A left UBI would be done on top of the existing welfare state.
Yes.
And there have been left cases for that kind of a UBI, like Peter Fraze wrote a good article in Jacobin called Curious Utopias, sort of explaining how a left UBI could hypothetically be some kind of non-reformist reform that would move us closer to socialism, but that's not what this is.
Right, and that's always been my fear about the UBI is not so much that you couldn't come up with a good one, is that it's too easy to come up with a bad one. Yeah. And in addition to VAT taxes being somewhat regressive, is my understanding, the idea that you're going to take someone and say, choose, I guess at the beginning of the year, right? Like, oh, it turns out you chose wrong. Sorry, dude.
Guess what that adds to? Administrative overhead.
Right, exactly, of course. And then the idea that, like, what happens? Like, how long do you choose? When do you choose? How long is the period of time that you opt in for? And how do you predict when you're on Social Security disability how long you're going to be on for? I mean, this is...
I mean, I get the appeal, right? Like $1,000 a month would change my circumstances substantially, but that's not the limits of my political imagination.
Oh, for people that run Patreon podcasts, it'd be great to have that many people with that much money to spend. But you can't do this and shaft the most vulnerable people like that. And there's no reason to, other than ideological reasons, that you're running some sort of I want to make government smaller campaign, but don't want to be honest about it.
Let's play this clip. There's two stories that just adding to the body of work, just talking about how repulsive our disposition, our national disposition towards immigration is, particularly coming from the administration. One is that on Wednesday, the body of a 7-year-old girl was found 17 miles west of Lukeville in a remote desert area. Officials believe the child was from India. She was trying to cross from Mexico into the United States with a group from India. Tucson sector border control agents spoke with two women from India who said they had been separated from 3 other people trying to come across the United States with them, a woman and 2 children. Border Patrol agents believe human smugglers dropped the group near the Mexican border, where they were told to cross the terrain into Arizona alone. Agents searched for the missing people north of the border in remote terrain about 7 miles west of Quito Springs. They eventually found the little girl's body after a few hours. The area had a high temperature around 108 degrees, officials said. Searchers found footprints that suggest the woman and child returned to Mexico. They're continuing the search with Mexican authorities. My understanding is this is very close to the area that Scott Warren, the man who has been, whose trial just came to a deadlocked jury, who was on trial, put on trial by the American government for leaving water for immigrants trying to cross the border so they would not die in the desert. It's grotesque. Meanwhile, the New York Times has done a story on the youngest child separated from parents. I mean, this is kidnapping. This is kidnapping. The child was 4 months old and spent the next 5 months of his life separated from his parents. He's now almost 2. He's still not able to walk on his own or to speak. Kids develop at all different rates, but the idea that this kid was not traumatized, one day taken from his parents by U.S. authorities. Here is Caitlin Dickerson and Brian Stetler, talking about this story.
It took me months to find Konstantin Mutu. So I mentioned a federal court case earlier that had to do with family separations and that prompted ultimately the reunification of separated families. And while I was looking through those court records last summer, I found mention of a 4-month-old baby. I'd been really interested in separated babies in general and immediately thought this is probably the youngest child and quickly learned that he was. But because all of the individual records in that court case were sealed, and because, as we talked about, the government data was really limited, it took a long time to find him, basically just calling everybody in the country to see if anybody had heard of a 4-month-old baby who'd been separated, and ultimately we did. He spent 5 months separated from his parents. He's almost 2 now, and he's still not able to walk or to walk on his own or to speak.
4 months old when he was separated. And you think about the parents and why they decided to come, and you think about the government that broke them up. Caitlin, thank you.
You can tell Statler probably has young children. I mean, I think certainly It's problematic for anybody with any sense of conscience to find this problematic. But I think for parents to contemplate their 4-month-old baby being taken from them for 5 months and the trauma that would represent for that child is... I'm
not an expert on developmental sort of issues, but I'm pretty sure those are pretty important months not to be traumatized for.
I mean, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, look, the reality is that I think the vast majority of your disposition of life is going to take place from probably month 3 to age 5. And the younger, the more relevant in terms of shaping that. I mean, this, if you've ever planted anything or grown anything, I mean, it all just makes total sense. Physiologically, there are things that you can do at that age in terms of repairing things that you simply can't do. The amount that your eyes can get fixed and repair and generate new cells, even until age 6 or 7, is just, there's nothing, you can't replicate that. It's torturous. It's just, it's brutal. And, you know, I mean, look, when you go from basically doing this horrific things to children and people overseas through bombs, through tanks, through drones, through guns, and you make a population that is paying for it with their tax dollars, just accept it. Doing this in your own country, you know, just becomes just a slightly marginal, you know, becomes much more acceptable. And every time we allow anything like this to be okay, we are enabling another atrocity and horror that is yet to come. And so everything that's happening to immigrants now is just going to make it easier for it to happen to other people. It's really just horrible. What is oh, okay. Let's listen to Ben Shapiro's insanity. Here's Ben Shapiro. Who would have you believe there are good Jews and bad Jews. And the bad Jews are the ones who don't act like he does.
I mean, to be fair, I think he's a bad Jew.
Fair enough. That is the thing about Judaism, is that the Jews get to choose. There is no pope. But Pope Shapiro thinks that he is one, and he is now going to tell us about the morality, how horrific it is for children to be raised by two loving parents of the same sex. Because obviously of the varied experience he's had in dealing with kids of parents of the same sex.
What are your thoughts on adoption in the States? Well, adoption needs to be made much easier. Right now, it's insane But states are basically cracking down on adoption agencies if those adoption agencies have religious backgrounds. And we've seen adoption agencies in places like Massachusetts actually shut down if they prefer to hand a baby over to a traditional male-female couple as opposed to a same-sex couple. So Catholic Charities have shut down adoption services in Massachusetts because of this. Now, I think that there is a perfectly secular, rational case for handing a baby over to a male and a female, because I don't think that males and females are the same. I don't think fathers and mothers are the same, which is why every single Father's Day and Mother's Day, I make the same joke on Twitter. It's a running joke, and it is Happy Second Legal Guardian of Unspecified Gender Day. Because if you don't think there's a difference between fathers and mothers or males and females, then why have a Father's Day or a Mother's Day? Just have an unspecified legal guardian day. But if you feel a child needs a mother and a father, then yes, I think that it is perfectly fine and perfectly rational and, in fact, good to prefer, all other things being equal, obviously, a male-female couple to a male-male or a female-female couple or a single mom. And, there is nothing, I think, remotely controversial about that in a social science sense. Now, again, that's all other things being equal. If you're talking about an abusive household where the male is abusing the female as opposed to two males who are not abusing each other, obviously that is different. If you're talking socioeconomically, the difference between growing up in a house on food stamps as opposed to growing up in a middle-class household, that makes a difference too. It's multifactorial, in other words, but one of the things that would make adoption easier is more adoption agencies, not fewer adoption agencies. Also, the hoops that you have to run through in order to adopt are just ridiculous.
Right. We should be making all of those kids that we have kidnapped at the border available to adoption to male, female families.
It's a pretty amazing maneuver to go to say we need to make abortion easier, and then sort of make a sort of case that we should allow abortion or adoption agencies that discriminate against gay people to have more like he's saying. We restrict, it's too hard to adopt in this country.
It's too hard to adopt because we have agencies that want to discriminate against
gay
couples.
Yeah.
And therefore they get shut down as if there is that much demand that there wouldn't be other agencies that get up there. The reasons why we have intricate laws about adoption have to do with protecting children. And have to have to do with preventing baby mills and whatnot. But the idea that because 58 years, what was it? I don't know. 50 years ago, somebody wanted to call Father's Day, and I think 100 years ago we had Mother's Day, which of course was incredibly condescending. It's like, we're going to throw you a bone. You can't vote. You can't have your own a financial life. You can't have an economic life. You're not quite a slave, but you can be raped without it being rape. But you got your day.
He's such a little sophist. Like, I talked about this a lot with Ben Burgess. What he's doing in this clip is what he does a lot, and it's called a category error, right? He makes one argument that nobody would argue with, which is that, oh, men and women are different. And there actually is science to say that the sex binary and the chromosomes is not as much of a binary as people think. But just for argument's sake, yeah, sure, men and women are different. Everyone can see that. And then he claims that it logically follows from that kids need a male parent and a female parent when there's absolutely nothing to bridge that gap.
There's nothing to bridge that gap. And the idea that parents who come to adopt aren't necessarily better than parents who have had a child on their own. Like, the consciousness that you need to go and adopt versus, oh, we had sex and now one of us is pregnant is so different that I mean, I don't know how you measure this, but those parents who adopt, regardless of what the sexes are, I would imagine, on average, are far better parents in some respects than whatever couples that happen to have a child.
Yeah. Shapiro. This reminds me of when Shapiro talked with Andrew Neil, and he sort of freaked out. But he also mentioned that Obama participated in religious persecution of Christians and religious people in general. And he was talking about how Obamacare made you provide birth control or whatever that Obama over-the-counter thing was. So that's like, if my religious health insurance provider doesn't want to give women birth control, they shouldn't have to, and that's the persecution. It's the same thing with the Catholic adoption agencies. They don't want to give to gay people. So yeah, then you're not in the adoption business anymore. Sorry.
Right, exactly. You can't get licensed by the state, which is responsible for protecting people. The Catholic Church is not.
Good thing it's not.
Right. Fail.
They lost that responsibility. They lost that trust, I think.
Maybe just a little bit.
Gonna take a while to earn that back.
Speaking of loss of trust and responsibility, this is just un-effing believable. Story out of Arizona. Out of Phoenix, yes. The police department is failing to identify a cop seen in this video. It was a couple, Drayvon Ames and Aisha Harper. She was pregnant. They had their 2 young children in the car. Apparently, they were in some store. I don't know what it was, like maybe a toy store or some type of department store. One of the kids apparently took a Barbie. And they got into the car. It's unclear whether the parents were aware that the kid had taken the Barbie or not. And here's how the cops reacted. You will hear it. If you have kids in your car, you're going to want to skip this. And you should know, if you're not seeing the visual, that there are multiple cops with their guns drawn over a Barbie. But don't imagine for a moment that just one of the little girls in the car took a Barbie from this store. Just imagine that the couple, they shoplifted, I don't know, a TV or like an iPod or whatever it is that you think is of some value, that the cops being told that there was shoplifters. Because I'm just trying to set this up so that you can give the cops the greatest benefit of the doubt. Shoplifters in that car. You will hear the cops yelling. You will hear the man, Drayvon Ames, basically be as compliant as he possibly could. And you will hear the mother, who is holding a 1-year-old child in her arms, the pregnant mother. Play this.
Get out the fucking car! Get out the fucking car right now!
Their 4-year-old daughter walked out of the dollar store with a Barbie.
Police?
Yeah.
It doesn't open. I promise. I promise it doesn't open. You're gonna fucking get shot. Get your fucking hands off. Get out the fucking car. Get out the fucking car right now. Yes, get out now. Get out the fucking car. You fucking hear it? Get out of the fucking car.
You recording it? Yeah, I'm recording it.
Put your hands up. I don't give a shit. Put your hands up. Hands up.
She just cried, don't point it at my kids.
When I tell you to do something, you fucking do it.
You're not complying with me. Yes, I am. When I tell you to do something, you fucking do it. I am. I'm complying with everything, sir. Hey, right now, shut your mouth.
Put the other key down. No one else is
What'd you guys just do? I didn't do anything, sir. Are you okay? So, you can come get me. When I tell you to put your fucking hands up my fucking baby, nigga, it's a fucking
Hey, hey! Whoa, sir, come down! What's going on here?
That last voice was the voice of, I think, just bystanders who are videotaping this. Can't believe what they're watching. Woman holding a 1-year-old child, and a cop gets up into her face and starts yelling at her. And this is in Phoenix. And they want the woman to put the 1-year-old child on the tar. And it's been 95 degrees there?
It shows how messed up a world we live in, that my primary feeling right now is relief that nobody got murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah, they gotta release the name of that cop.
Yeah, at least. Apparently, and there were 2 cops there who seemed to be completely out of control.
Yeah.
The one who came into the woman's face at the end, who had just yelled at the other guy, who was basically like, I'm going to get shot. He was worried about getting shot. He's like, I'm complying. They will not release that guy's name. The other cop, that cop, who they won't release his name, apparently is, on some type of suspension or something like that. The other one is out on the streets.
Yeah, everyone who thinks that the left is hyperventilating about the threat of fascism, fascistic elements already exist in our state, and it looks a lot like this.
Really just disgusting. You got to wonder at one point. I mean, what kind of training is going on that no one is stopping this cop? His partner is not stopping this cop. 4-year-old girl took a Barbie. So here is Mitch McConnell. And folks, we're not going to get to many phone calls, I'm afraid. So if you've been hanging on and you want to jump, but got a lot of clips. Here's Mitch McConnell, who, of course, he's going to seat whatever Republican judge he can get on there. Of course he is. Was this predictable? Of course it was. I made this prediction 2.5 years ago. Mitch McConnell is going to put every single judge he can do on there in any way he can. And guess what? There's not a single thing that can be done to stop him. He no longer recognizes blue slips. There's no longer any filibuster. Here is Mitch McConnell.
Mm-hmm. Senator, you had your legacy on judges with President Trump is going to be terrific, getting constitutional judges appointed to the court. If another seat opens on the Supreme Court, are you going to push that through?
Absolutely. The precedent that people ignored back in 2016 when I made the decision not to fill the vacancy during the middle of the presidential election was who controlled the Senate.
That's right.
You have to go back to 1888 to find the last time a Senate of a different party from the president confirmed a vacancy to the Supreme Court that occurred during the presidential election. Makes sense. Mm-hmm. We will still control the Senate next year. If there were to be a vacancy, of course, we would fill it.
You could almost see him almost crack up in that. there's a moment there where he almost cracks up. It's probably because of the look of belief and acceptance on the face of the Fox and Friends. One of those is Dan Bongino, guy who I guess he got kicked off of all the
NRA TV.
He got booted from NRA TV. First off, there's no such thing as constitutional judges. That's a made-up thing.
Isn't every judge supposed to be constitutional?
There's no judge, the best judge in the world wouldn't say, like, I'm constitutional judge. That doesn't make any sense. It's just a made-up term that means nothing. Just combines two words. You could say patriotic judges. It's also a made-up thing. McConnell knows he's full of crap. Of course he is.
Well, he said the American people. I mean, just to specify, he wasn't always saying this. He was saying, let's let the American people decide. Right.
Absolutely. It's, but he found his, talking point that is going to satisfy the boobs who watch Fox and Friends. But the bottom line is elections have consequences. This was completely predictable. Of course, Mitch McConnell is going to break every rule or norm or whatever it is to get people and part of the reason is because Republican voters are okay with that. Far more okay with it than Democratic voters. And I say that as a regret. Democratic voters should be just as upset, just as willing, and in fact, just as demanding of whoever, Chuck Schumer, whoever it is, to go in and do whatever it takes to win, to be politically expedient, if you will. That's what politics is. It would be very nice if we were living in an era where there was Senate comedy and they all, went and took a schwitz afterwards, a hard day on the floor of the Senate and said, we're not going to push on this one because it's not the right thing to do. It's your pick. And, well, we're just going to return things to normal. Doesn't that sound diluted? Doesn't the idea that someone could shame Republicans at this point sounds diluted? It does, doesn't it? This is from a tweet. Joy Reid apparently asked Joe Biden how he'll get his agenda past Mitch McConnell. Quote, I know you're one of the ones, Joe Biden said, who thinks it's naive to say we have to work together. But Biden goes on to say, you can shame people to do things the right way.
Wow.
The idea that Mitch McConnell could be shamed in any way is either so diluted or such a lie that the person who utters such a thing should either be kept from harming themselves or from harming others. This is so cynical, so far from the truth that Joe Biden must know, or Joe Biden has, maybe he never had him, but has completely lost his marbles. One of those two things has to be true. He either knows he's telling a massive lie, or he has completely lost his marbles. And I think he knows he's telling a lie. That's why he says, I'm going to address your critique before you say it. And I know that's your critique because everybody knows that Mitch McConnell has not an ounce of shame. But it's amazing. It's amazing. This is, and I mentioned this earlier, that somebody was arguing with me on Twitter, you don't believe in hypocrisy as a principle or anti-hypocrisy. You and Joe Biden sitting together in a swing. Those are the two people there. Those are the two people who argue for hypocrisy. people who are fundamentalists and people who are bullshit artists. And those bullshit artists are usually in the center. They're just corporate centrists. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I want Joe Biden to say this again on that debate stage. And I hope there's somebody on that debate stage who is willing to say, to address Mitch McConnell. Because I don't know that there is. I don't know if Bernie is going to say that. Bernie's not the one who's going to, necessarily target Mitch McConnell. Bernie's probably not going to go after Joe Biden, I don't think. He might, but I don't think so.
Well, Bernie has been targeting the right to a large degree, like maybe in anticipation of the general and building a case for why his political vision has the best chance of beating back this kind of right-wing populism that's taking over the world right now.
I think Bernie, for the most part, is very reluctant to go at individuals. And I don't know that he'll go at Biden this early in the, I doubt it. Question is, will there be anybody else up on stage saying like what I heard you say about Mitch McConnell? And I don't know if there is. They're all going to focus on Donald Trump.
Maybe if they try to get Bernie on his, you supported a challenge to Obama. What do you say about that? If you don't like Obama so much, and Bernie can just say, well, Joe thinks Obama's better at, or Joe thinks he's better at Obama than Obama is.
Right.
You know you're bad when I'm siding with Joy-Ann Reid against you.
There you go. I can only imagine the look on her face that prompted him to address her critique before she uttered it. Here is Mike Pompeo, I think, reiterating what Tom Cotton says, too, right? Here's Mike Pompeo saying, basically threatening the U.S., the Iran with war. It's unclear who was involved in the explosions that hit tankers the other day in the Gulf of Oman. But here's Mike Pompeo. Despite the slight discrepancy in what was used and how sure they were about this stuff, that's how it worked with weapons of mass destruction. We know there's weapons of mass destruction there. Well, it turns out they lied because they couldn't know. They just felt that if we said, we think there's weapons of mass destruction there, we sort of feel like there should be, they probably couldn't have gotten the war they wanted. Here's Mike Pompeo saying the U.S. will strike Iran if we need to protect international crude oil from, let's say, attack.
To help us do that.
So when you talk about military response, you're talking about that, keeping the waterways open. You are not at this point talking about a strike on Iran.
Oh, goodness. President Trump has said very clearly he doesn't want to go to war. At the same time, we've made very clear that
do you have the legal authorization for a strike on Iran?
We always have the authorization to defend American interests. Remember, they now have attacked U.S. aircraft. On June 6th, there was a missile fired from Yemen that we assess had Iranian assistance that took down an MQ-9 aircraft. These are attacks on fundamental international norms and now on American interests, and we always have the right to defend our country.
But I ask you because there are questions about whether the existing authorization for use of military force, the AUMF, would actually include a strike on Iran.
Sure.
Are you confident that you could go and not have to ask Congress for permission to take action?
Morgan, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but the American people should be very confident the actions that the United States takes under President Trump will always be lawful, always consistent with our Constitution, and we will always do the hard task it takes to protect American interests wherever they are.
But do you need Congress's permission?
To do what, Margaret? I mean, I don't know how to answer the question in the abstract. Permission.
Well, you said a range of options are being looked at.
Yes,
so.
Every option we look at will be fully lawful.
Oh, okay. I feel better. Understand the game that Pompeo's taking here right now, right? He's saying to the president, and he was saying that to the president, I get it. You don't want a war. We're going to keep ourselves out of war. Of course, we've got to be strong. You don't want me going on there and sounding weak. And the idea is, bit by bit, we provoke. Maybe they retaliate. Maybe they don't. If they don't, then we make it as if they've retaliated, and then we provoke a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, oops, somebody forgot to leave the emergency brake, and we parked on a hill. And there goes the car rolling down the hill. Who's going to stop it? Shoot, we forgot to keep the doors unlocked, and we can't run in and open up the door and stop the car. Wonder if there's any support in the Senate for the future Donald Trump for the new version of Donald Trump in 2024 in the event that the old one conks out in 2020. Let's check. Because Tom Cotton was on, what was this? Face the Nation.
Defined as a hawk on Iran. You see these recent attacks. These are commercial vessels, not military installations. What kind of response is warranted?
Well, Iran for 40 years has engaged in this kind of attacks, going back to the 1980s. In fact, Ronald Reagan had to reflag a lot of vessels going through the Persian Gulf and ultimately take military action against Iran in 1988. These unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike.
You're comparing the tanker war in the 80s to now and saying that that's the kind of military response you want to see?
We can make a military response in a time and in a manner of our choosing, but yes, unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
A retaliatory strike. When we had Secretary Pompeo on just a few moments ago, he said the U.S. always has the authorization to defend American interests. As someone who sits in Congress, do you believe that he can act, the administration can act without coming to Congress first?
Yes, Margaret. Going back to President Washington and all the way down to President Trump, the fastest way to get the fire and fury of the U.S. military unleashed on you is to interfere with the freedom of navigation on the open seas and in the air. That's exactly what Iran is doing, and one of the world's most important strategic choke points.
First of all, is this really, what is not United States interests? These are not U.S. boats. Japan hasn't, as far as I know, has not made some declaration that they want us to attack, nor has Norway. What is not a U.S. interest if we can decide unilaterally to bomb in this instance? He has got it right from George Washington all the way down to Donald Trump. But the idea that he's calling for a military strike based on this event that's already happened.
Like there's a reason
they want a war, folks. They want a war. This is not a drill.
The president has the authorization to act to defend American interests. Certainly, it would be in keeping with what President Obama did unwisely in Libya in 2011 in launching a weeks-long campaign to overthrow the government there. What I'm talking about is not like what we've seen in Iraq for the last 16 years or Afghanistan for the last 18 years, but retaliatory military strikes against Iran that make it clear we will not tolerate any kind of attacks on commercial shipping on the open seas.
Boy, does he want a war. Boy, does he want a war. Nuts. All right, I got time for one more phone call, and I'll take some IMs and got to go. This is the last phone call of the day, calling from a 306 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Blue Swan. I'm calling from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada.
Blue Swan, what's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to talk about building a wall across the northern border here. I'm a Canadian libertarian.
Okay.
I'm not really. I just wanted to create some sort of Pavlovian response to Canadian politics for you.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Was that it?
But I just wanted to let you know it's a comment on the politics that's going on in Canada. I just want there's likely going to be a new right-wing conservative government entering leadership in Canada here, and I find your show interesting because a lot of what you guys talk about and a lot of the politics that you discuss ends up washing over into Canada. So
Sorry.
Like your
Sorry about that.
yeah, that's where the wall comes in. Got to keep that on your side of the border.
I would not blame you.
Yeah, but it's really interesting what's going on here. But the right is really spreading, and it's likely going to happen in Canada.
Well, hopefully we can turn the tide here, and then you guys will be a leading indicator for you. But
I mean, we've been getting plenty of Canadian right-wingers that have been coming down here, so I don't know.
Thanks for David Frum.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Gavin McInnes.
Right.
God.
Thanks, man.
Crowder, I have a comment on Crowder.
All right, make it quick.
All right. Well, you had a caller call in about last year. It was with regards to a gay joke that's in your interim song.
Right.
I don't know if you guys remember that.
Yeah, I do.
He was kind of you guys. Yeah. Well, that kind of exposes kind of a form of hypocrisy because you guys joke about it. So the context with Crowder is that he's saying that he's being maligned because of his gay jokes, but you guys did it in a context that made sense. It aligns with my sort of humor where I kind of create a caricature of right-wing talking points, and I feel like that is what you guys do, right?
Right.
Yeah, there's a difference between
joke. So that
there's a difference between a joke about homophobia where the homophobes are the butt of the joke and a homophobic joke where gay people are the butt of the joke.
Yeah, and if we start putting out videos that deny the reality of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, that joke will start to look a little bit different when we play it ourselves.
Exactly. So like that really exposes that like Crowder's essentially full of shit. You know what I mean? It's not about it's the context of the joke.
Right. It's not the word.
About,
yes, of course. It's not the word gay is not the problem.
Yeah.
You can say the word gay.
Yeah,
at least in my
that,
mind.
Gay
Anyways.
people say
it's
it.
a question. What does it matter who says it? I mean, the point is, I don't think that there is a word, and I include the N-word in this, that you cannot say, frankly. But the context in which you say it better be made it clear as to what the intent is, particularly if it's one that's more sensitive. And, we're all adults. We all know what that means. I appreciate the call, Blue Swan. I mean, we're all adults and we all know what that means. There has been context where I have said the N-word on air. And I mean on air. But it was done in a context where my audience, would understand why I was saying it and what the intent behind it was. And so, and I don't know, I can imagine a context in the future where I would say it. I'm not going to say it now. It's just not necessary. And I don't need to use it for the impact of the word. But context matters. The tweet that I put out that got me fired temporarily. The reason why I got rehired was because everyone, including anti-rape advocates, were like, this is the 1% of rape jokes that are actually jokes that identify who the victim is and who the perpetrator is, and are satirizing those who would be apologetic for the perpetrator. Context matters. And, I will say things to people who are adults, presumably listening to this program, that I wouldn't say to 6-year-olds because they can't pick up on the context. But everybody knows what the context in which Steven Crowder is doing. It does his humor. His humor. Even if you think it's funny. All right. Done with the phone calls. Going to do 5 IMs to get out of here. Sorry. I'm already late. Gabe, formerly from Chicago. Sam, just signed up for a membership, so I'm going to need you to come in for some overtime next Saturday. Yellow No Sweater. Hey, Sam and Collective, please shine some light on the San Francisco DA race. My old friend Kisa Boudin is running in a brilliant anti-establishment progressive campaign not to be missed. We got to check that out. There's a lot of DA races that are interesting around the country. It's been so far. World gone wrong. Job security is definitely something only union members want. Mountain West Socialist. Sam is going to make me start irrationally hate the number 2. Senator Perg. I'm just so tired of the Democratic Party and their spinelessness. Winnipeg Craig, big shout out to Jamit Singh and Canada's NDP, who just announced a plan to expand our single-payer healthcare system to cover pharmacare, eye, dental, hearing, mental health, and addiction coverage. Pajama Boy, hey Sam, I know this is getting a little head, but if Bernie does win and we don't win the Senate, do you think he'll be able to get much done? I don't know. Louis77, time to start calling libertarians what they truly are, anarcho-capitalists. And the final I am of the day. Left Coast Lefty, please consider reaching out to Dave Zirin of Edge of Sports in The Nation magazine. He views sports through a social justice lens, is well-versed in the harsh realities of the Olympic Games, transgender issues, player protests from Colin Kaepernick to Muhammad Ali. He's a fascinating guy and would seem to fit in right with the Majority Report. I suggest you Google Majority Report and Dave Zirin, and also Ring of Fire and Dave Zirin. I've spoken to Dave Zirin many, many times on this program. Many times. He's a great guest, and he's got a great podcast himself.
He's got a good take on the transgender athlete stuff that's been going on.
Oh, maybe we'll have him on Ring of Fire to talk about that. Would be good. All right, folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. The months drifted into years, while I shifted in and out